Have you ever been told that some of your habits are, well, a little weird? We're going to flip that whole idea on its head today. What if those quirks, those things that make you different, are actually signs of a really complex and super efficient mind?
So, are your weird habits actually your greatest strengths? That's the big question, right? And I'll give you a little spoiler alert. The psychology we're about to dive into pretty much screams yes.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break it down. We'll start with protecting mental energy. Then we'll get into the power of deep thinking. After that, we'll look at redefining social connection, and we'll wrap up with finding validation from within. All right, let's jump right into our first section, protecting mental energy. This is all about the strategies your brain is using to hold on to its most valuable resource. So it all kicks off with this concept called mental efficiency. You can kind of think of it like your brain's personal low power mode. See, instead of draining its battery on a million tiny decisions every day, it's sieving all that juice for the stuff that actually matters. This is how you avoid that dreaded decision fatigue, that feeling of being completely wiped out just from making choices. And this is where things get really interesting, because there's a huge gap between how things look and what's actually going on. You know, someone might see you wearing the same kind of outfit and think, oh, that's lazy. But no, it's actually a genius move to save your decision-making power for bigger things. Or that messy desk, people might call it disorganized, but it's really selective organization. Your brain is just tuning out the unimportant stuff to focus on the real problems. And staying in on a Friday night, that's not being antisocial. It's a brilliant strategy to avoid sensory overload and just recharge. And that whole idea of avoiding sensory overload, it even explains why some people absolutely love winter. It's not because they're gluey, not at all. It's because the world just gets quieter. There's less noise, fewer crowds. For some brains, that calm is the perfect environment to get into a state of deep focus. It's all about creating the right mental space to really thrive. So, okay, how can you actually do this? How do you protect that mental energy? Well, here's a super practical tool, the 3-2-1 power down rule. It's a form of what psychologists call cognitive offloading, which is just a fancy way of saying you're giving your brain a clear signal that it's time to chill out. It's simple. 3 hours before bed, no more heavy food. 2 hours before, stop working. And 1 hour before, no more screens. It's a simple little routine that tells your brain, hey, it's time to rest, so you can get that deep recovery you need. And speaking of rest, here's a game changer about sleep. It's not really about how many hours you get. It's all about the cycles. See, your brain sleeps in these 90-minute chunks. And the real secret to waking up feeling amazing is to wake up at the end of one of those cycles, not in the middle of it. That's how you avoid that groggy feeling and actually feel refreshed. Okay, so now that we've talked about saving energy, let's move on to our second big idea and see how these things connect. We're talking about the power of deep thinking and how some minds just process the world in a totally different way. And at the very core of this is a really cool concept called cognitive reflection. All it means is having the ability to pause. It's about resisting that first gut reaction, that first impulse, and instead taking a second to think a little deeper. You're not just reacting, you're actually reflecting. And once you get this idea of cognitive reflection, it changes everything. Suddenly, what looks like procrastination isn't procrastination at all. It's your brain doing a deep analysis, mapping out every possible angle before it makes a move. What people call overthinking? Nope, that's just you processing all the important details that other people are missing. And talking to yourself? That's not weird at all. It's called verbal reasoning, and it's one of the best ways to get your thoughts in order. This also explains another classic trait, getting super obsessed with something for a short period of time. You know what I'm talking about. When a curious mind finds a topic it loves, learning about it literally gives the brain a little dopamine hit. It feels good. As this quote says, they're not being weird. They're feeding their mind with information that excites them. And once they've gotten what they need, they just move on to the next exciting thing. Now, this unique way of processing things doesn't just stop with hobbies. It totally extends to your social life. So let's dive into our third section, redefining social connection. This is all about why, for some people, quality and depth will always beat quantity. Okay, so this brings us to a trait that has kind of a clinical-sounding name, low social dependency. But don't let the name fool you. All it really means is that your happiness and your sense of self-worth don't depend on getting constant approval from other people. It's not just that you're okay with being alone, you actually feel energized by it. You know, think about someone who really loves going for long walks by themselves. It's so easy for us to look at that and think they're trying to avoid people. But this quote really nails it. They're not avoiding people, they're entering a deeper thinking state. They're looking for that mental space where they can really connect ideas without all the noise. So, what's really happening during that solitude? It's definitely not a passive thing, it's an active, productive process. Your brain is connecting different ideas, it's working through complex problems, and it's recharging a sensitive nervous system. It's all about getting a chance to access that rich inner world that so often gets drowned out by, just life. And this really highlights a fundamental difference in social priorities, right? The standard expectation is often, have a huge circle of friends, be good at small talk, always be in contact. But for the deep thinker, the priority is completely different. It's about having a few super high-quality connections. It's about meaningful conversations, not just pleasantries. Socializing isn't some kind of obligation. It's a genuine, intentional choice. All right, all of this leads us to our final, and honestly probably the most powerful section of all, validation from within. This is all about how you can build a rock-solid sense of self that doesn't need anyone else's approval. The key idea here is another one of those psychology terms, internal locus of evaluation. And again, it's a fancy way of saying something really simple. Your report card on yourself is written by you. Your self-worth comes from inside. You're not constantly looking over your shoulder for what other people think. You're guided by your own compass, your own standards and values. And when your focus is internal like that, it just completely reframes everything. That moment of doubt you feel sometimes, that's not low confidence, that's intellectual humility. It's the wisdom of knowing what you don't know. Choosing not to post your whole life online, that's not being secretive, it's just a high orientation toward privacy. And being kind of low-key, even on your birthday, that's not being unenthusiastic. That's just good old-fashioned emotional regulation. So if you were to look at where this person's self-worth comes from, what would you see? Well, it's pretty much all generated from the inside. It's built on a foundation of their own internal goals, their personal values, and their self-awareness. And what about external validation, social approval? They're at zero. They're just not part of the equation. So let's tie this all together. What's the big takeaway here? The common thread that connects every single one of these so-called weird habits is this. They are not flaws. They're actually incredibly sophisticated strategies that a complex mind uses to protect its energy, to think more deeply, and to stay authentic in what can be a very, very noisy world.
And that, of course, brings us right back to you. Now that you can see the hidden logic, now that you understand the why behind the wiring, the only question left is how are you going to embrace yours?